Shalom, and thank you for taking a few moments of your precious time to spend with me. You know, in a few days, we'll be celebrating Hanukkah, also known as the Festival of Lights or the Feast of Dedication. It gets these names because of the history of the Maccabees. And we share this story every year. Before 165 BCE, before Christ, the Jewish people in Judea lived in hardship under Seleucid occupation. King Antiochus IV seized the temple in Jerusalem and forced the Jewish people to abandon the worship of their own God. He made them forsake their customs and the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, and he ordered them to bow the knee to Greek idols. Because of this intense persecution and pagan oppression, a group of 4 Jewish brothers, some of my heroes, raised a tight-knit group of religious freedom fighters. And these men were fiercely faithful and loyal to God. They became known as the Maccabees, a small band of warriors, Levitical warriors, who fought against pagan rule for 3 years. Miraculously, despite the superior size and strength of the Greco-Syrian military, the Maccabees defeated their enemies. The Maccabees regained control over the temple. They cleansed it, clearing away all the Greek idols that were inside of it. They rededicated the temple to the Lord in the year 165 BC or BCE, on the 25th day of the Hebrew month of Kislev, which usually corresponds to the month of December on our calendar. So today we want to focus on dedication. This festival is a time of rededication to God. And so I'm going to look with you at Hebrews chapter 11 to reflect on this. The writer of Hebrews gave us a tour through what I call the Hall of Heroes. The author focused on their achievements, but also detailed the character traits that made them heroes. The argument of the book of Hebrews is really quite simple. Yeshua is better, not just the best. He's better. Better than the angels, better than Moses, better than the Levites, better than the high priest. He also provides a better rest, a better sacrifice, a better covenant, a better hope, and much more. There's also one trait that all these heroes had in common, and that was faith. The author of Hebrews, we don't know who it is, argued that faith is a better basis for a relationship with God than human effort. And the author wanted readers, his fellow Jewish people probably, to understand that having faith is a better foundation for a relationship with God. In other words, our faith drives us to be obedient. Without obedience, it's impossible for faith to really flourish. It might sound as if the writer is dismissing the commands of the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, but that's not the case at all. On the contrary, the writer of Hebrews said the very same thing that the psalmist said in Psalm 40, verses 4 through 8. How blessed is the man who's made the Lord his trust. Sacrifice and meal offering you've not desired. My ears you've opened. Burnt offering and sin offering you haven't required. Then I said, behold, I come. In the scroll of the book it is written of me. I delight to do your will. Oh my God, your law is within my heart. You see, faith is superior to a heartless, faithless, cold obedience to the law. Faith is the spiritual oxygen we breathe, leading to obedience and blessing and good works. The psalmist didn't discount obedience to the Torah. He simply declared that without faith, keeping the Torah has little value to God and little value for us. The author more fully defined faith in Hebrews 11:6. I read, and without faith, it's impossible to please him. For he who comes to God must believe that he is and that he is a rewarder of those who seek him. In the same vein, when the author asserted that Yeshua is better, he didn't suggest that angels, the patriarchs, Moses, or the Levites are without value. It simply means that Yeshua is better. He is the ultimate revelation of God for the blessing of mankind. The writer of Hebrews wrote, God, after he spoke long ago to the fathers and the prophets, in many portions and in many ways, In these last days, he's spoken to us in his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, through whom he also made the world. And I love this. And he is the radiance of his glory and the exact representation of his nature. And he upholds all things by the power of his word. Hebrews chapter 1, verses 1 through 3. Wonderful words. The Hall of Heroes, our heroic forefathers and mothers, all of them lived by faith. They suffered in faith, and they gave their lives in faith. And though what they saw through faith was invisible to others, even sometimes their own families. Abraham believed if his son Isaac was killed, that God would actually raise him from the dead. He considered that God is able to raise people even from the dead, from which he also received him back as a type. Hebrews 11, verse 19. You see, Abraham acted on the basis of his faith. Faith is only visible through what you do and what you say. And it is especially evident when your convictions cost you something. Let's remember the Apostle James' comments on Abraham's faith. James writes, "Was not Abraham our father justified by works when he offered up Isaac his son on the altar?" You see that faith was working with his works. And as a result of the works, faith was perfected. And the scripture was fulfilled, which says, "And Abraham believed God, and it was reckoned to him as righteousness." You see, a man is justified by works and not by faith alone, according to James 2:21, verses 24 that we just read. Denying ourselves and following the Lord rather than seeking the rewards of this world has caused many believers to make decisions leading to self-denial and suffering and even martyrdom. The cloud of witnesses that we read about in Hebrews 12 exemplified these principles. We read, "Therefore, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let us also lay aside every encumbrance and the sin which so easily entangles us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us." Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 and following. The well-known Greek term martyreo, or martyr, means witness. It became associated in the early church with both suffering and death. Martyrdom and the association with death may have been the idea by the time the book of Hebrews was written. We're not sure. But certainly many of the examples the author selected in Hebrews 11 were in fact martyrs who suffered and died for their faith. And the word came to mean exactly that. We might view this great cloud of witnesses surrounding us as fans and people cheering from seats for the teams that are playing on the field. I never saw anybody cheer like I've seen in the World Cup. And I imagine that some of these saints might be as enthusiastic. I like this image, but unfortunately it's pushing the Greek just a little bit. But these witnesses arrived in the presence of the Lord in a variety of ways. Most, of course, through death, some via disease or accident. In a few instances, especially noted is Enoch, through some type of instantaneous translation from this life to the next. Yet quite a few arrived in the presence of God as martyrs. The motif of a race paints a wonderful picture to encourage us to remain faithful to the Lord until the very end, until we complete our personal race in this life for His glory. The cloud of witnesses surrounding us motivates us to run the race set before us and to finish well. They are our examples. We learned from this cloud of witnesses how death should not be viewed as failure or defeat, but rather as the entry point to an eternity of glory. As Paul wrote so beautifully, "If we have hoped in Christ in this life only, we're of all men to be most pitied. But now Christ has been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who are asleep." 1 Corinthians chapter 15. There are others besides those listed in Hebrews chapter 11 who finished the race and are now in glory, and they're part of the cloud of witnesses that you and I will meet one day. They are Messianic Jewish believers, some of them, some who were martyrs, and now are part of this great cloud of witnesses. They're waiting and watching for us to complete our race. So, Who are some of these men and women and messianic believers and even missionaries to the Jewish people that we should admire? There are so many to choose from because we have so many great heroes upon whose shoulders we stand. But there's a messianic Jewish brother I would love to introduce you to. His name is Isaac Feinstein, and he lived in Galatz, Romania. The Norwegian Israelite mission carried on work in this area called Galicia or Galatz, Romania, under the direction of this Jewish believer in Jesus, Isaac Feinstein, and his wife, who is Norwegian, and two Norwegian deaconesses. Now, Richard Wurmbrand, who you may have heard about, Tortured for Christ, who survived the war and served with the Norwegian mission, wrote fondly of Feinstein during his early years and related some of the details of his ministry. In fact, Isaac Feinstein led Richard Wurmbrand to the Lord. So Isaac was a business executive in a small firm. He heard the gospel at a Christian gathering, and he received Jesus as his Messiah, and almost immediately experienced incredible persecution from his father, as his father was a very observant Jewish man. After growing as a believer, he sensed God's call on his life to serve among his own people in Romania. This man, Isaac Feinstein, had an unlimited capacity for work, Wurmbrand says. He published a periodical for adults and for children, as well as countless pamphlets about the faith. He preached all over Romania in all the Jewish areas and became an outstanding personality among the disciples of Yeshua, Jesus the Messiah, in his home country of Romania. He was a pillar of God's temple. Wurmbrand notes that young Feinstein, at 37 years old, became a victim of the war. He had actually formed a Hebrew Christian or Messianic Jewish congregation before in the town of Iași, in that community, in that area, and regularly visited Wurmbrand in Bucharest. Wurmbrand recalls one of his last visits as the war and the anti-Semitism and persecution were heating up. The atmosphere in Iași was infected with anti-Semitism and the ever-present overhanging threat of a pogrom, an attempt to destroy the Jewish people. Feinstein was on a visit to Bucharest and was staying in Wurmbrand's flat. Wurmbrand suggested that he not return to Iași, where certain death lay in wait for him. Wurmbrand recounts in his book, Christ on the Jewish Road, "We could send a Romanian brother for your wife and 6 children and bring them back to Bucharest where they'd be saved." Isaac answered so beautifully, "The shepherd's duty is to die together with his flock. I know they will kill me, but I cannot abandon my brethren. I'm returning to Iași." And a few days after his return to his hometown on June 28, 1941, this terrible pogrom broke out against the Jewish people. 11,000 Jewish people were actually killed. Feinstein was arrested, and they took him, these Nazi sympathizers, took him to police headquarters, where he actually preached to his fellow Jewish detainees. He exhorted them to receive Yeshua, Jesus, as their Messiah and to prepare to meet their God. And according to the story, which was actually told to his wife by some survivors, he died while a rabbi was reciting Psalms aloud, and Feinstein was explaining how they foretold about Jesus. The rabbi himself died a few moments later, a traditional Jewish person and a Messianic Jew, both the victims of the same hatred. Unfortunately, according to Wurmbrand, not a single man from the Messianic congregation in Iași survived, and all were killed in this terrible pogrom, and then the rest of them were murdered or sent to prison camps when the Nazis took over. These are some of the brothers and sisters actually we're going to meet in glory. They're all part of that great cloud of witnesses cheering us on. So what can we learn from this great cloud of witnesses that Hebrews chapter 12 speaks about? We learn that deep personal faith caused each of our heroes to demonstrate at least 3 character traits that I believe are necessary for the building of the church and for the Messianic movement. The first one is courage. These witnesses in Hebrews chapter 11 were courageous. Our Messianic forefathers displayed a supernatural ability from the apostles onward to face extraordinary hardship without giving up. They kept going in the face of constant opposition. You and I will face opposition because of our faith in Jesus, because of our mission for being Jewish, some of us, And at times, some of you will face opposition just for being supportive of the modern state of Israel as we see anti-Semitism on the rise. Yet we must never give up or succumb to the pressure to compromise our faith in the truth of the Messiahship of Jesus. Like Feinstein, we must run this race with courage until the day comes when we join all those who have gone before. Secondly, is commitment. Our commitment must be directed towards Yeshua, Jesus himself, and not really our theology or ministries or churches or congregations or organizations. Our deepest commitment must be to the one for whom we are willing to suffer and sacrifice, and that is a person. That's the person of Jesus. As the writer of Hebrews added, "For consider him who has endured such hostility by sinners against himself, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart." We've been so tempted to grow weary and lose heart over the last few years. But we should not only reconsider our commitment to the Lord, but we also must consider our recommitment to one another, to bring the good news of the Messiah to all people, to the Jew first and also to the Gentile. We need to hold each other's hands and hold each other up. We need to partner together at a variety of levels because the task is far greater than one individual or even one congregation or one ministry. And then we need to really make sure that we have a calling. We must remember that he who has called us is faithful, and nothing can or should keep us from reaching the finish line where we will hear those words of welcome so beautifully said by our Messiah. I can almost hear them now. "Well done, my good and faithful servant." The Apostle Paul reminds us of something similar in 1 Corinthians 15:58, which is actually my life verse. "Therefore, my beloved brethren, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that your toil is not in vain in the Lord." So have a clear calling and nothing can stop you. And one day you and I will join that great cloud of witnesses. We get to leave a legacy too. May not get written up in the New Testament, but we leave a legacy also of our lives and our ministries to a new and next generation who might become heroes also. So dear friends, I hope and pray that you'll leave an example, a legacy of courage in the midst of hardship, and an unrelenting, convinced sense of personal calling to reach our world for Jesus. Thankfully, we have a perfect role model of courage, commitment, and calling in the Messiah himself. So in this season of dedication, would you join me in rededicating yourself as I rededicate myself to run this race and to serve the Lord until we see him face to face? God bless you and happy Hanukkah. And may the Feast of Dedication inspire you to live a dedicated life for the Lord.